and welcome into a special live edition here of Sports and the World. I'm Ladarius, and I hope all of you are well and safe during this quarantine. But I just want to get right into it. Usually, for any episode that I've done, and hopefully many of you have been listening to the episodes that I've done, I usually put prep work. I usually put in hours of prep work for the show. But I felt for this particular topic that we're going to talk about with George Floyd in Minnesota, I felt it was very, very important to integrate conversation, because one of the things that I feel is very, very important is that we have dialogue. Because if we don't have a conversation, then everything becomes very one-sided, and it gets us nowhere. I feel that when we talk about what happened with George Floyd, and when we saw what happened, you saw the video, we all saw it. So it was very hard to find words. It was very, very hard to find words and to find context. So if any of you want to jump into this conversation, you want to go live, let me know in the comments, and I'll bring you on because I want to hear how you feel. Because I know how I felt. When you see what happened, you see the video, it's become too commonplace. And if we can't understand why myself and many black Americans across the country are upset, then I don't know what to tell you. Because it's not about this incident. It's about a multitude of incidents. And when you see the footage, I see you, Jeffrey. And the simple reality is, it should upset everyone. I shouldn't have to tell you that to be outraged, because we all are outraged. You lose words, you lose context. Like, what can we do? How can we normalize equality in this country? It still feels that we have a long way to go. But when you watch what happened, you watch the video, everyone was outraged. Now, everyone may not agree. Is that we all saw the video of him in the back of the knee. We all saw that. We may have, how do I phrase this? He said he couldn't breathe. We all heard it, that he couldn't breathe. And we have to call it what it is. You know, the officer, Derek Chauvin, he was charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter, but let's just call it what it is. Yeah, you know, I don't want to say that he was killed. It was murder. He murdered that man. He murdered George Floyd. Let's not say that, oh, he killed him. No, he murdered him. And anybody can come on here and try to say what it was or wasn't. But the reality is that, where do we go from here? What's the next step? Where do we go from here? And let's be clear. And I do want to talk about the rioting and that's going on. I do want to talk about that. I understand why they're doing it. I understand because they want justice, and they feel to this day that's still the best way to go about it. I understand, but just because you understand something doesn't mean you condone the action. And we have the question, what George Floyd's family, this is not what George Floyd would have wanted. If we want to bring justice, we have to do it the right way. And it's not a popular opinion. It's not a very popular opinion to sit back and say, oh, well, we have to let the system work, because we've all seen the story. And I get that we've all seen the story. But what my point is that we have to listen. This officer is not, listen, he's been arrested. It's baby steps. And that may not be a very popular thing to hear. Because we all want what we like to call microwave justice. We want to arrest someone and get the trial and put them in jail. But there's a process. And just because we don't like the process of it does not mean that there's not going to be justice. It's just that it's about timing. And I understand, once again, to go back to my original point, I don't condone. It's one thing to protest peacefully and civilly. You're not going to get any arguments there. But you cannot destroy your city. I've never subscribed to that philosophy, and I won't. But I understand why they're doing it. But that's not how we get justice for George Floyd. That's not how we get justice for anyone. How we get justice is we go about it the right way. We can be angry, and I'm upset. But I also want us to honor the memory of George Floyd. I don't want this to get overshadowed. This rioting and the looting that's going on. If you're peacefully protesting, you're not going to get a problem out of me. But where you will get a problem out of is the way you go about doing it. Because at the end of the day, this issue is not about us in Black America. It's about every one of you. It's about all of us. Yes, does it affect the Black community more? Absolutely it does. But it's also important that when we speak out about it, it's also imperative that people who are not Black speak out about it. Because we've known this for years. We've known it for decades. We've known it. But when you have voices that aren't ours, who see the injustice, who see that footage, you see that footage, we should all be outraged. I know I'm outraged. A lot of you are outraged. The simple reality is that if we want change, if we want true change, we have to understand that just because it doesn't affect us directly, that does not mean it doesn't affect us at all. And it's very important that when I decided to do this, was not to be angry. Not to come from a place of anger. Because it's easy to be angry to seeing what's happened within the last 30 days. Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. Breonna Taylor in Kentucky. And now George Taylor in Minnesota. It's easy to be angry. Super easy to be angry. But the reality is that we have to come from a place to have a conversation. Not one of those, oh, we'll sit back and... No, we have to have a conversation about race. Because even if you don't, whether you agree or disagree about the looting and the rioting, that's always going to be a debate. But what we can all agree upon, and even all those in the comments here on Facebook Live and all those who are listening, is what happened to George Floyd was wrong. And it was wrong. It was wrong. It was wrong. I don't want to hear any form of condoning his actions because there's nothing to condone. There's nothing to condone. And when we talk about this, it's important to understand this. That there were more officers. There was 4. The face, Derek Chauvin, he's the one that put the knee on the back of his neck. But let's be very clear. There were 3 more complicit officers. There were 3 others who allowed that to happen, who thought that was okay. Let's be clear. We can sit here and blame those cops, but more specifically, we could blame that Derek Chauvin. But listen, this man kept his job, and he had a systematic history of incidents, maybe not to this degree, but he still had his job. It's important to question, why was he allowed to keep his job for as long as he did? And like I say, I'll go back to the point I saw in the comment, which is a very good point. But I want to finish up this point. Is that what we have to understand here is that this man was able to keep his job. There was complicity. So, as much as I blame the officers, especially the one who put the knee on the back of his neck, I also sit here and blame the administration, the police department, for allowing him to be on the force with all these incidents. And I want to talk about something that I saw in the comment which caught my eye. And it's someone, Jeffrey Fritz, I believe he's in Minnesota. And he said that there are 2 big different things happening up here right now. That there are protesters and there are looters. Protesters are angry at the police. However, there are many protesters that are also trying to stand between the stores and the looters. And he got sent home from work because a group of people were throwing bricks through his job's office building, the windows. It's a problem up there. I'd like to have Jeffrey on if he wants to come on and talk about it more. And we have to understand what Jeffrey said, is that I'm all for the protests. I'm all for protesting. But what I'm not for is the looting. Because what is a 60-inch television doing to get justice for George Floyd? If anybody can answer that question, I'd love to hear it. Because you can't sit there and say anything. Stealing a television does not get justice. Destroying your community does not solve the problem. What solves the problem is that how do we figure out where to go? Because on twofold, it's very hard for me. Is that I stand back and I'll always say this. It is that there is more good than bad on this earth. I'll stand by and believe that. And that's applicable to the police force. And I understand that people may not see it that way. But there are good men and women who work on the force all over the country, protecting and serving all of us. But unfortunately, they don't get on the headlines of the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. No, they're not the ones on the covers on the newspapers, nor are they the ones on network television. It's the ones who are complicit and the ones who still feel it's okay to kill people of color. to kill us, to kill me. Not me specifically, but people who look like me. This issue and this conversation should be all about getting people who are not like me to understand why we're angry, to understand why we're upset, why we can't feel safe in any sort of space. That's what the world, but in this case, I want this country to see, is that the voice, your voice, those who are white, those who have to understand that you can't condone what you saw in that video because it should have hurt everyone. It should hurt. And all we want, it's one thing when we know about the injustice. Unfortunately, it's commonplace, and it shouldn't be commonplace. But at some point, you reach barriers. You reach an impasse where you're tired of being tired. So at some point, listen, even though I may not agree with the violence that's there are people who are angry. There are people who are upset. And they feel, well, if we do this, if we do that, then the world will see. Mind you, I don't think that's the right way to go about it. But they feel that it's been going on for so long. They feel that nothing was going to happen. The ball wasn't going to keep rolling. So they had to push the ball up the court themselves to score and get justice. And the reality is, I understand it, and I'll keep saying it. I understand it, but I don't agree with it. Because what this is all about is how do we get justice for a man, by many accounts, was a pillar for his community. How do we get justice? How do we get justice for George Floyd? Because if nobody, because at the end of the day, his family wouldn't want that. And that's why I believe, and that's why I don't condone it. His family, that's not how you honor his legacy. That's not how you honor his life. Because from the many stories that I've seen about him, because we have to understand, the looting and all of that is it's blasted on our television screens, it's blasted on our laptops, on our phones. But I want to talk about George Floyd, the person. By all accounts, was a man who worked in that community. As a matter of fact, he did security with the man who put his knee on his neck. Let's make it about George Floyd. Let's get justice. Because at the end of the day, the looting is taking us away from that narrative. I'm not going to use the word the media. People who may or may not have agendas want you to focus on the looting and the rioting. But that's not the narrative. That's not the story. How do we get justice? What can we do? We have to have a conversation. Because I will, and I said it earlier on, and I'll say it again, and I'll continually say it. There are white people who are good. But unfortunately, that doesn't get covered in the news. The bad gets covered. So how do we figure out where to go? Because at the end of the day, and it's very hard. That's why I may feel like I'm stumbling, but it's very hard to talk about it. Because many of us in the black community want answers and we want justice. Because you get tired of being tired. And here's the thing, and someone brought up a point. When the President of the United States, and I don't care what your politics are, when you're the President of the United States, you're the leader of the free world. Because I'm not necessarily, yes, I'm condemning the looters, but more importantly, when the President of the United States, who is the leader of the free world, and calls them thugs, but yet what happened in Michigan says, oh, they're good people who just want freedom. And I asked the president, because at the end of the day, listen, people can say he's not your president, but that's not how the system works. Whether you voted for him or not, he's the president. What I felt the president said was wrong. And take politics out of it. What if someone you knew, someone you respected, or you're supposed to respect, basically told you, in essence, that they called one set of people thugs, but yet calls people who bring guns to the state capitol good people? And I want somebody to listen. I'm not going to sit here and make it about politics. But because politics, when the president of the United States, he's the president. People look to him for leadership. I don't care. This is the thing. I don't care whether you voted for him or not. Because the discussion here is not about politics. It's about his words. And he happens to be the president. That's where we have to have a conversation. And people may not like that, and that's fine. I'm not saying I hate Trump. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that words matter. Especially the importance of who the words come from. Because if you're a Trump supporter, how can you support separating, even though you don't like, and I don't like what the looters are doing, but to call them thugs, as opposed to people who have guns to go to a state capitol, how can you call them good people? And I understand that may anger people, and I understand that completely. But the reality is that he's the president of the United States. And I said it earlier. How can you call us, how can you call those looters thugs? Listen, you don't have to, once again, I don't condone what the looters are doing because you're not solving any problem whatsoever. But when you call them thugs and you call other people good people for taking guns to the state capitol, the question becomes, what would happen if those in Minnesota went to their state capitol building? What would happen? What would be the end result? Because at the end of the day, the people in Michigan are worried about, in the grand scheme of things, that they can't leave their house. But ironically, they left their house. I'm not going to get into that either. But the point is that how can you call those thugs who want justice? I don't like the looting, but there are still protesters who are still going about it the right way. And the reality is, that's the focus. You should be upset. I have no problem with protesting whatsoever. Never have, never will. But as I nearly wrap this up, just a few more thoughts. Is that we have to understand, we have to ask ourselves as people, when is enough enough? What's it going to take to get change? More importantly, when are people going to speak more up about it? Because those who don't speak up about it, it doesn't matter what your politics are. Like I said earlier, it's a human being who lost his life senselessly. So the question becomes, How do we solve that? How do we solve that problem? And thirdly, and most importantly, how can we normalize being normal? Because at the end of the day, this is not about us. It's not about me as a black person. It's all about us as Americans and what can we do for change? Because what do we do about the change? Can we get more people to speak up about the change? And more importantly, how can we combine the first two? How can we get the change? How do we get people to talk about the change? Because listen, it's not an easy topic to talk about, but it affects us. We live in the same country. It's not like the 60s. We're not segregated. And and the thing is, I just wish, and Jalen Rose said this on Get Up this morning, I just wish that more people would embrace us would embrace us in the same way that they embrace black culture, our music, the athletes, every aspect of our culture. But yet, it seems as people, they could care less about us. So, as I close, thank all of you for joining me here on Facebook Live and for those listening here on the Sports in the World podcast. And let's continue this conversation. Let's continue it. Because it's important to have this conversation. You know, head over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/sportstheworld. Join our group to talk about it. Go to my Twitter account, @Ladarius_Brown. Go to the podcast Instagram, @SportsTheWorld, and my Instagram, @CubbiesFan77. Because we need to continue to have these discussions at all platforms, at all times. So once again, I thank you for your time. And once again, let's keep the conversation going. And until next time, be real, be you. And more and more, be blessed. Thank you.